Record. Okay. So welcome everyone to the panel on how to freelance successfully. Just a few notes. As I had said earlier, this is a webinar, so unfortunately we can't see you on the screens, but you can ask questions. So just put the questions in the Q&A section. Might as well do it as you're thinking of it, and you can just, and I will ask, we'll talk here for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions, and I'll go through and ask the questions. So I'm Whitney Dangerfield, Publications Director here at NYU Journalism, and we have two recent graduates with us. Talia Barrington is a graduate of the Cultural Reporting and Criticism program, and she's written for The Atlantic and The Washington Post and The Cut, Cosmopolitan, Slate, and other publications. Here, why don't you wave, Talia? There you go. Arielle Domb is also a CRC graduate. It's written for the New York Times, Vogue, Cosmo, Guardian, Huck Magazine, Brooklyn Magazine, and many others. They both graduated in 2023, and I've been admiring their clips and keeping in touch with them, and just admiring their hustle ever since. On this panel in the past, this is the third one I've done on how to freelance successfully. We've had writers who were out of school for more than a decade or so, but I think it's helpful to hear from writers who, are pretty new to this world too. So thank you both for joining us. Arielle is in London and Talia is here in New York. So we'll just jump in with questions. So as I said, you both graduated in 2023. And when you were here, we would talk a lot, and I knew you were both publishing while you were in the program. So can you tell us about the first piece you published while you were at NYU Journalism? Was the piece an assignment for class? Was it an idea outside of class? How did you get the idea? Just let us know, tell us how that all got started. I can call on one of you, but does one of you want to go first?
I can go first if you want.
Okay. Cool.
So I actually, because of visa issues, I'm sure as other international students in the chat, I wasn't allowed to pitch to publish stuff in America. There's your visas, like you can only publish stuff in certain classes, so slightly restricted in what I could publish, and I could only publish stuff from certain classes. So I ended up during my first term, I did a reporting class, and I ended up getting really immersed in this queer taxidermy scene in Brooklyn. There was a taxidermy competition, and I went to it, and I was really surprised that obviously I had an image of a taxidermist in my head, and it was maybe a conservative white straight man, but the crowd there actually wasn't that at all. It was a lot of trans people, and there was just it really diversified my preconception of what a taxidermist would be like. But it wasn't until the next year I did a photojournalism class, and then with my visa I was allowed to publish stuff. I'd started my pre-completion OPT early, or something like that. I'm forgetting all the terms. That then I worked with Brian Breaker, who was the editor of Brooklyn Magazine at the time, and did a photo story. Which I think if you have another skill, if you're able to take pictures as well, or I don't know, you can do social media or audio, it can be appealing to editors, because then you can offer a bundle deal. So I think that was my first piece that I published in New York.
Yeah, and for me, I think I was trying to remember which class. I did end up using sort of the root of the piece that I first did while still at NYU Journalism for one of my classes. But frankly, it was a story that came to me through connections through my past. And it was about the potential for same gender figure skating teams to be legal in a competitive international field. And it just seemed to me that publishing whilst at NYU would kind of be a bonus, reaching out to editors. I think for myself, because this was a complete career change for me. I'd never written anything for publication before being in the program. And so it just seemed to me a really good opportunity to be able to reach out to editors with that credential of being I'm at NYU Journalism. This is something I'm working on. And at least with that piece, I sort of turned out to be right, and that ended up in Slate. And then it was just sort of easier from there for pieces to follow from that.
And I mean, I remember, Talia, you showing up in my doorway, that you were like, you were both very serious about getting published. And Arielle, we would talk a lot too. And I think it's can be hard for students to think through, like they want to take their classes seriously, and then they also want to be pitching. And so I'm like, how did you juggle those two things in your mind? Like how did they work together, or how were they separate? I think sometimes students will say, I wrote this thing for class and I want to place it somewhere. And it's not always how it works. It's not like you'd be like, oh, this perfectly fits into this publication. So I think you do need to be strategic when you're here if you want to be publishing and taking your classes. So I just wanted to know, like, sort of, if you could talk a little bit about that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like me and Talia were both, as you said, we came to see you, Whitney, a lot. And yeah, I'm sure for you guys, like in the call now, you'll probably do the same or like have done the same because you're like at this. And I would just recommend that so much because I do think like half the skill of getting stuff published. I don't like, I guess like obviously you have to be good at writing, but I think it's so much about like knowing how to pitch things, how to, you know, market your work, how to connect with editors and stuff like that. So I think for me, I think there were some people in our class who were just like, I want to focus on the writing and like honing in on my craft and not think about the kind of money making side of it. But I think I just wasn't in that headspace. Like ultimately the money making side of it is important unless you have money coming in from like other means. So I think I was always thinking about it. It did mean I was quite stressed throughout term, think about everything. But I don't know, I think th having that like simultaneous mindset of like honing in on your craft while also thinking about the business side of it, I think is important and you can do it in like a fun way as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Arielle said. I think for me personally, I felt this kind of pressure to try and just like make the absolute most of my time at the journalism school. And frankly, Whitney, you were a major piece of that. And again, because I had never done anything before, I felt um like it was just all new to me. I didn't know how to write a pitch email. I wasn't in a corporate job before that, so I hadn't even had that experience really. Um, and so it just seemed so important to me to just try and gain every little piece of knowledge from everyone on that floor. And yeah, and so pitching just became part of that. And like frankly, it's something, so it's like, we graduated a little over a year ago, and I would say only now do I feel a little bit more like I can not slow down. It's not slowing down at all, but like kind of like take a bit of a breath because it just felt so necessary to like get everything I could out of my time.
And how did you, I mean, you have assignments in class, right? And so sometimes those assignments, I mean, rightfully so, are long form journalism, or maybe may not fit into a particular thing. So sometimes you have to think, okay, I have a 4,000 word assignment for class, but this may be more like a 1,200 word piece. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, or maybe it's like a Q&A assignment, but actually you see something in it that could fit into a certain section of a different publication. And so you'd have to like write the piece instead of it being a Q&A format, or the opposite, Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how you would think about stories in two ways? So you had the assignment, and then if you saw potential, some stories may not have potential for getting published. Not everything you ever write will get published. But can you talk about like sort of thinking about story ideas in both of those ways?
Mm.
Yeah. I think at this point, I think that I have published almost everything that I worked on as a final for a
Nice.
class. There's a few pieces that were never gonna that wasn't gonna happen. Um, but none of them are in their original form in the way that you explained. So I don't know, take from that what you will. I just, I wanted to, we're doing a lot of work for these classes. And to me, it just seems logical to try and like utilize that out in the real world as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I probably ended up working on maybe two or three, like publishing two or three pieces which were kind of related to something from class. But yeah, exactly the same as Talia. I think partially because of my visa issues, so I couldn't necessarily pitch them when I wanted to and stuff like that. It meant things had evolved, so there was that practical restraint. But yeah, I think it's frustrating because obviously when you work really hard on something in class, you've made it perfect and you would love to just, send that off to an editor. But in my experience, and I mean, one of my friends, it didn't actually get published, but she sent a personal essay to an editor at the New Yorker, and they said they wanted to publish it. And then they ended up airing her after that. So it was like up and down. But yeah, I think there's worlds in which you can send a published thing to an editor, particularly maybe if it's a personal essay, it's more likely and they will just pick it up. But yeah, in my experience, you're having like a skeletal pitch and then rebuilding it in the direction the editor wants to take it, which is often very different to how you maybe what you initially found interesting about it.
So I mean, I jumped like a little bit ahead from now that you're like publishing a lot. So what's your advice? Talia, you said like publishing, pitching that one thing. After that, it was a little bit easier. So like, what's your advice about going from one or two pieces to publishing several pieces? So for example, you both have created beats of sorts. Can you tell us about that? And how much do you lean into your beat to keep publishing more things? Like, what is your advice to someone who's been like, okay, well, I published once. How do I get to the publishing all the time part of it?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a
Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Arielle.
I feel like me and Talia had a similar experience of like not really almost choosing the beat that we now like have. Like I randomly write a lot about like sex and relationships now, which definitely wasn't what I like planned to do. But I feel like sometimes you write about something once and then someone tells you something you find interesting and then you learn to another story and then sources reach out to you with stuff. I think it is helpful to have a loose beat, to kind of have a bit of an identity as a writer. I find I'm just getting a lot more stories at the moment, and I think if I'm able to like link previous stuff I've done, say I've written several stories on AI intimacy or something like that, you'd look like you're more experienced rather than coming to something completely random. I have also done completely separate stories. Like my most recent story for the New York Times was about like the scuba diving scene in New York City that hadn't really been that documented. So you can go like completely off the rails, but yeah, I do find it quite helpful. Um, Having a beat and a beat that can evolve and change over time, that you don't need to feel constrained by it. But I think, yeah, me and Talia both have the same thing where you have almost like a ripple effect with stories. And when you get into that, it's just so great because you get to know a subject deeper. You can use the same sources, build relationships with them, and just become more of an expert in something. Yeah, I don't know what your experience is, Talia.
Yeah, I think so. I had this funny experience after I published that first piece with Slate that it did really well and it was very exciting. And I spoke to Maria Clara, who was also in our year, and she had just around the same timeline had published her first piece in the New York Times. And we both had like this what felt like a really, really long period of time after that where we were pitching and pitching and pitching and like nothing was happening. And we were both like, wow, was that it? Like I got my one piece. And it just felt like almost worse than having never published anything before. Um, and then that second piece did happen, and then a third, and then a fourth. And then that, that started to feel a bit more comfortable. Um, I when it comes to like the beat, so my background, I was in the figure skating world for a long time and when I was younger, and a lot of my friends continued on and became Olympic champions and went on and to do all sorts of things. So I just had this access to the sports world, and the stories that are found in there. I personally have very little interest in like reporting sports in terms of like this team beat that team. But you know, that being said, at this point I've written enough that like I've written quite a bit for the Guardian sports section, and like they reach out to me now with stories, which is really nice. Um, but like building that takes a little bit of time, and I'm happy to lean into it. And like quite frankly, if you'd told me when I started the program that I was going to be writing about figure skating, I would have been like, absolutely not. Like, no interest. But a story is a story, you know, and these, you know, human interest, I don't know, situations, they impact everyone. So it started in that, and then, you know, I've broadened out from there. So like, you know, I did a piece for The Atlantic that was on Alzheimer's and social media. And, you know, so obviously very different. And I don't see my long-term future being a serious focus on figure skating. But that being said, it's something I can always draw back to. And I think having that basis, and it doesn't have to be something like, you know, so niche, you know, it can maybe you worked in like an H&M in high school, and like you met a bunch of people who experience the retail world, or like any experience is something you can always draw back to and find stories in. I'm finding.
Yeah,
I,
I'm
I was just saying, I always remember one of the first times I talked to you, Talia, you were talking about how you didn't want to write about sports. Um, and I was like, well, you do have pretty good niche. Like, it's sort of interesting what you have. I mean, and I think that what you found is that I think that you didn't want to write, as you said, like this person, this team won with these amount of points or whatever, like that you found a way through that you like, that you enjoy. What were you
Mhm.
gonna say, Arielle?
No, just that I completely agree with Talia. I feel like like long term don't think I'm just going to be writing like sex and relationship sort of stories, but like slowly I'm getting to work on, you know, I did a long form piece for the Guardian about unknowing victims of sexual assault. I have another piece coming out in the Guardian soon that's a about, but like yeah, like this whole other big story. Like I feel like you can slowly get closer to. I think
Yeah.
like we're both interested in like the human story behind like whatever you're talking about. So if you find a beat that works for you right now, like you can still, you know, find like psychologically interesting stories, and that can like evolve throughout your career.
Yeah, you're not being pigeonholed. And I think I mean I do think I want to talk about how you write your pitches and all of that, but since you, Talia, you were talking about how now the Guardian comes to you with pitches, or well, not pitches, but with story ideas. And Arielle, do you have the same thing? People are coming to you with some ideas?
It's like maybe happened like once. It's not, no, I would love that to happen.
I mean,
Um,
that's the ideal, is like, I guess we should talk a little bit about like how do you actually write a pitch? Do you have a formula? And so like talk about like the more formal pitch, if you guys have a certain way you do it. And then also I'm curious, like after, like with the Guardian, if they're coming to you, are you then able to not write the formal pitch? You sort of have like an idea that you sort of dash off. But let's talk about the more formal pitch first. Do you have a formula in mind, or something that seems to work well?
Go ahead, Ariel.
um, I feel like I almost have different types of pictures. Like there's some stories like both of the Guardian pieces that one that's been published, one that's coming out, that you know me and Whitney have worked on together. I really refined. They both had months and months worth of kind of pre-reporting that started in term time, and I'd been mulling over for a while. Like when you're trying to land like, you know, a really long form feature, I feel like it's worth like really working on your pictures. I mean, Whitney's like guide for pictures I still use. I find that really helpful. Um, I've also found if I'm in the swing of writing for a publication and it's more of a sort of trend piece, I'm less, I don't like slave over my pictures that much. When I have a like relationship with the editor already, I will, I guess, you know, write it in like a couple of hours and fire it off to the editor. So I think, yeah, the amount of care I put into the pitch depends on like what type of story it is, whether it's more investigative and like longer form or a trend piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly the same. I think I also find myself, and I do this somewhat consciously and somewhat unconsciously, kind of mirroring and matching the tone of the editor. So like maybe my initial pitch will be somewhat formal. And then like I have one editor, she's at Women's Health, and she like she like writes back like, oh my God, this is amazing, like 8 exclamation points.
Which is
And
that?
Curry Engel.
Yeah, no,
And
because
so then
I
I'm
have
not
seen those. They're so nice.
and so I'm not gonna like respond to that with like, you know, something continued like formal. I'm like matching that tone a little bit. And now when I reach out to her with stories, I I am considerably less formal with it. Like I actually pitched her this morning. I was like, hey, I saw this, you know, what do you think about this for a story idea? And I'd like sent a link and like a few little details on it. So that's obviously very different. Um, I think one of the things that I find the hardest, I remember, and Arielle, I think you went to it as well. I remember in maybe our first semester, though, Whitney, you arranged a panel with someone, an editor from the New Yorker, an editor from New York Times, and an editor from the Atlantic.
Mm.
And a question that was asked was, you know, how long do they like their pitches to be? And they all had different answers.
Yeah. The New Yorker was like, I love a long pitch. And I was like, nobody listened to that.
I know. And honestly, I found that I'm still frustrated by that. Not as in like I just don't know what the right thing to do when I'm reaching out to someone for the first time. Arielle, maybe you have a better system than me, but I think I think I can't unconsciously sort of like if I feel like the piece is going to have like a long narrative twist and turn to it, I will allow the pitch to go a little bit longer. If I just need to get some facts out there, I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. But you just until you've interacted with that editor, you just kind of never know.
Mhm.
And that's not great advice, but it's what I've experienced.
I'm exactly the same. Like I had this piece in Vogue relatively recently about how like community saunas have become a social trend in the UK and like beyond. That was like 3 very small paragraphs. Like I barely did any pre-research. I was just like, this is a thing. Like these saunas have opened, and here's a statistic to show there's more saunas in the UK. I'd love to go to some and write about it for Vogue kind of thing. But the piece I did for The Guardian on unknowing victims of sexual assault, me and Whitney worked on that pitch together. I reckon it was, I mean, maybe like 4 chunky paragraphs type thing. Like it was, and again, I think that's a good metric that Talia said when it's narrative driven, twisty turny. You do need to lay out the like beats of the story a bit and show that it's twist and turny, show that you're an expert in this story in this subject area. So I think, yeah, how much effort you put into the pitch and how long they are, I think, yeah, as Talia is saying, I think it just depends on the nature of the story.
That the sauna thing, which was a great piece. I saw it and I think we talked about it when you came in for coffee and I knew you were thinking about it. But did you have a relationship with someone at Vogue? Because I mean if I'm sitting here and I was thinking like trying to be in a student's seat and just being like, I want to go to a bunch of saunas for Vogue. You know, like how did you because that does seem sort of pretty informal. Did you have a relationship already with the
Yeah,
editor?
I'd written one piece for Vogue previously, which again, it was kind of, I guess, I think was often an element of luck when it's a cold pitch to an editor you haven't worked with before. I pitched something about how there was like a TikTok trend, run clubs of a new dating apps, and then I was like, I want to go to a run club to investigate how like steamy run clubs actually are. And she like this Vogue editor I'd never written for Vogue, just responded like instantly being like, oh yeah, we want to do a piece on run clubs. Um, so, and often when I've like broken into a publication, it's just been good timing. Like I pitch something and they're like, oh my God, that's like we're actually doing a theme on sex or on like rebellion and this fits in perfectly.
Mhm.
Um, And I will say, like, for public, like, for transparency, like, UK Vogue, they pay like £200 for a feature, so it's like no money, and it's just the um the the like communication's so slow. So after that editor responded saying she wanted to do the piece, she then like, didn't answer me for like weeks. So I had to follow up loads, and then so sometimes with like obviously the bigger, more prestigious publications, yeah, there's also downsides of it. You can maybe get like you don't necessarily get amazing pay, and you can sometimes get lost in like obviously the editors get hundreds of emails every day.
Yeah, that kind of moves us into like some of the nitty-gritty stuff about pitching. Well, this is also a question that someone's asked, that's on my list too, but how many ideas do you have going at once? Do you send out a certain number of ideas every week, every month? Or are you not thinking about it that way? Or, yeah, what's your strategy on that?
I personally have a really hard time when you sent out this question before. I can't really quantify it. And the way my brain works as well, if I was to say to myself, okay, well, I'm gonna have 10 ideas for this date to this date, it just for me personally, and I think everybody will find their own groove, that just doesn't work. Um, what I do find is that if I have an idea, I'll just sort of like write it down very quickly. That is something, otherwise, it does disappear. Um, and I'll find, and perhaps this is a bit of a tangent, but I do pitch things out to multiple places simultaneously. Sometimes I'll leave it, like if there's somewhere that I really, really do want it to go, I'll give it some breathing room because as Arielle touched on, like it can take editors weeks and weeks and weeks for things to get back. I was trying to sort of do some math on like how much time it takes. And I think for everything that I've written, not there's that much, that isn't breaking news related in any way, the average time from when I pitch it to when it comes out is about five-ish months.
Yeah.
Just for people's expectations. Like it's slow. Um, but so that's why, I'll give things a little bit of breathing room if I really, really want it to go in a certain place. But otherwise I'll pitch out to multiple places at one time. And I'll just be transparent about that. I'll just be like, look, I'd really like this to get out by, and sometimes I just sort of make up like some reason why I think it should come out by the summer or whatever. So I'm pitching simultaneous places. And I've never had any negative response to that. I just had a piece accepted to the New York Times, and she just asked me where else I'd pitched, and I just told her, and that was the end of that. So I think people do kind of understand. And I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I think it's
Well, I think in that same panel that you mentioned with the New York Times and well, in a recent, I don't know if it was that one, and a recent panel, some of the editors, we asked that question is, are you okay with simultaneous pitching? And they were like, listen, it's hard out there. It's fine. Like as long as do you say in the original pitch, I'm pitching this to several other publications? Do you? Like, I think sometimes you can say that or you don't have to. I think, of course, if somebody like if the New York Times is like, we want to take it, and then it like a little bit later, like I would probably let the Guardian or whatever know, hey, listen, I got this piece taken.
Yeah.
Do you guys do that? Because one of the editors was like, then I have FOMO, and I was like, I love that.
yeah.
But it's
No, I feel like I wasted so much time when I first started pitching stuff. Like I'd like pitch to one publication and then follow up after a week, then follow up after another week. And then like by that time like the story had passed. I think I would definitely pitch to multiple places at once. Like I would go mad and like fire out loads because you still want to think about your relationship with the editor and like whether that story is appropriate. So like I'm still selective with where I pitch the story and will kind of alter, as Talia was saying, kind of alter my tone and like the focus depending on the publication. But yeah, I think I used to be in fear like, oh, what if the New Yorker and the Atlantic like both want my story at the same time, but like actually as if that's going to happen. And I did actually have recently that I pitched a story and The Cut and Vice both responded that they wanted it, and I was like, oh my God, this is actually the fair, like, what am I going to do? But then like Vice ended up saying like they passed on the story. So I think actually with the state of journalism right now, it's just I just, well, I mean, it probably will happen at one point, but like, oh, it's just unlikely that you'll be in that position where it's the exact same time. I think as long as you're respectful, as soon as it's another publication expresses interest and it looks likely, you communicate that to your editor. Because I imagine, obviously, for editorial teams, they're going through a lot of people, so you don't want to like just like not think about the other people involved and make it stressful for them. But as long as the communication is active, I think it's fine. I don't usually say that I'm pitching elsewhere. However, I've had one editor, I like she didn't respond to me and I got accepted elsewhere and then said it had been, I was like, oh, it's been accepted elsewhere. And she was like, oh, I'd appreciate you like telling me. So I've told her, I appreciate you telling me if you're pitching elsewhere. So when I pitched to her since, I've told her. Um, but I usually don't, just because it takes so long for them to answer anyway that yeah.
When I first came here, I was telling students to pitch one at a time. And I think part of that's because I came from an editor's background where I would be pitched and then I would let someone, if I would let them know, and they're like, oh, it's already taken. And then I'm like, from my point of view, I had like talked to my editor, the higher editor, and told it in a story meeting, and like I'd spent time on it. But then sort of as I'm sitting more on the writer side of things, I'm like, and it is hard. Like, so you just be as transparent as possible. So how do you find the right editor? So I think a lot of times students ask me that, and sometimes I just like go on the masthead and you can see who it is. But do you guys have a strategy for how you find the right editor to write to?
I mean, obviously, anytime there's a commissioning editor, that's great. I've had luck sometimes pitching to like an editorial assistant. They often, have more time and can accept pictures or pass it on to someone else. Anytime you're able to have any contact with the editor before, whether that's like on social media, like I wouldn't like send a pitch on social media, but if posting your work, you can like engage with each other before, just to kind of have your name recognized. I think that's always useful. Or to, if you have any opportunity to meet them in person, obviously that's always great. Like the first New York Times article I got, Whitney hosted a talk and I like met the editor there and told her I'd pitched her something. So I think it just makes such a difference. Yeah, I don't know about you, Talia.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever managed to meet anyone in person, but I do a fair amount of stalking. Um, I will, I'll check out people's LinkedIn's. Also, another thing is I'm never sure how up to date mastheads are, and there's so much overturn at every publication now that, I don't want to waste my time pitching someone who isn't working at a place anymore. So, I'll go into people's LinkedIn, social media. I'll try and see if possible, like what they've written before. Because most editors obviously have done a little bit of writing themselves. And so if I sort of see that their style or their interests align in some way, I just feel a bit more safe to pitch that story to them. Like for example, the piece that I just got accepted to the New York Times, it's going to be in the dance section, but that editor had worked at Sports Illustrated many years ago, and there is a sort of sports element to this profile, and so I was like, oh, maybe she'd be more interested, and she was. I don't know how much that played into it, but those are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about.
Same.
Um, you know, yeah, I think one of the things that, and perhaps this moves us to a slightly different question a little bit, but one of the things that I didn't understand, when I was first starting out was how much editors want your work if it's good. I just sort of was like, oh, like they're being nice to me by accepting this pitch, and then I did get coffee actually with my editor at The Atlantic, who I've worked with a few times, and she was like, no, I was really glad to like connect with you because we need our own like team of good writers behind us. And so that kind of changed my perspective a little bit, where it's like, obviously I'm not like, oh, you should take my work, but they do, if you have a good idea, if you have a good story and you can pull it off well, they want you. So I'm just sort of that's also kind of playing in my head, like, is this editor going to be excited by this? And that's just what I'm constantly thinking.
That's great advice. I mean, and it's so true. I mean, I think that once they know that you can do it, it's sort of getting over that first hump, then they're like, all right, let's like keep going, working with you. I get this question a lot, is what do you use as your subject line on a pitch?
I find I can be a bit like I don't know what the word, almost like tabloidy with the subject line. Like think of like the most clickable thing. It doesn't mean that that's the subject line that's going to be used in the story. And like obviously you still want it to be accurate, but like I'm fine with something that's just like quite clickable because they're going to get hundreds of emails. So I think if you want to be not hyperbolic in the sense that you're actually that like you're saying something that isn't true, but something that's just like a bit maybe like overgeneralizing, that obviously then in your pitch you make more like not overgeneralizing but just as like clickable as possible, so I prioritize that. And obviously always put pitch in the subject line. And another thing I find, I try to imitate, as Talia's kind of touched on, the like style of the publication. So I've just had a piece come out in like Vice and pitch like a very like vicey subject line. So look at like the articles they've published and like kind of copy the style of their titles.
Yeah, I've also everything that Arielle just said, but I've also had some luck when I'm not sure how, like, what's the most clickable part of the story. Um, Sometimes what I'll do, and it's a bit of a, I guess it's a bit of a game. I'll say pitch question, especially if it's someone that I've worked with before.
Hmm.
And I'll start off by saying like, "Hey, I have this idea. I'm not sure. What do you think?" And I have a pretty good success rate with that. I wouldn't do it all the time. Um, but it just, people are like, "Oh, what's the question?" It makes you want to open it. And like everyone's touched on, these editors are getting hundreds of emails a day. So it's like, whatever you can do to get them to just open the email.
Mhm.
So
Another tip that I have, because I tend to follow up twice after pitching someone. I say that's the average, but you can like maybe this is like an obvious point, but you can change the subject line each time. So I'll like often trial out like each time I chase them, I'll try a new subject line because then it's like three different opportunities that maybe they'll open your email. So yeah, that is what I do.
one more thing I'll say to that, and this is obviously this only works after you've worked with someone once. Um, I personally have found, and like this might change as I get more experience, but I personally have found that editors are more likely to open up an email chain that you already have going with them. So it gets a little messy, and I don't love it personally. It like really stresses me out looking at my inbox. But if I do have a new pitch with with an editor that I've worked before, sometimes I'll reply to our previous chain, "Hey, I have a new pitch. Here's a very, very brief outline. Happy to follow up in another thread." And sometimes they'll say like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, shoot it to me." And then you'll see them like they'll open it right away. Um, but sometimes, even when it's an editor I've worked with several times, they just miss your emails. They're getting hundreds of emails a day. And so that's again, it's a tactic, but you're just trying to be seen. And so sometimes, yeah, by responding to that already present thread, you're just a little bit more likely to get that story opened.
It looks like we have a bunch of questions. We have several questions in the Q&A, but while I start looking at those, I wanted to ask, so how long do you wait until you follow up? Like Arielle, you were saying with that Vogue story, they said, yeah, we love it, and then you didn't hear from them for weeks. So like I would be like, so do you not love it? So I would hear from students a lot who were like, I heard from them, then I didn't hear from them, or well, how long do I wait? And when is a silence a no? So like what's your philosophy on that? How long do you wait until you follow up?
Yeah. So in general, if I get no response, I tend to wait about 5 days, and then 3 days. Unless it's time sensitive, in which case I'll put like important or urgent in the subject line. But I've like rarely done that because you don't want to like the boy who cries wolf kind of thing. Like yeah, more selective with it. Um, I have had these infuriating situations. I've had it with the cut recently with like a story being accepted but and then I don't hear anything for ages and the story is very timely, but like you really want to write it for that publication, like the same thing I had with Vogue. I'm just been like very like relentless and annoying. I feel like follow up every like with the cut I followed up. The cut I also had that then once I submitted the piece, I was told I'd hear back by a certain date and then didn't hear back for like another month or something, or like about 3 weeks to a month. Which Talia knows about. Yeah, I just
I've
like
experienced the same thing.
yeah, I just would be persistent. With the cut, I followed up like every week, and I wasn't getting any responses. It was so weird because it was like an editor I'd had m multiple phone calls with, and then I changed for subject line, and I was like update on X article like question mark or something like that. There was a bit more like um. I sometimes also I don't know. I find I'm very like girly in my emails sometimes, and then people can ignore me like exclamation marks like oh it's absolutely fine if not, and editors ignore me, and then I sometimes imagine I'm like a like entitled man and speak in a more like abrupt way and people actually respond to me. So sometimes when someone's been ignoring you for a while, I just yeah, I try and get rid of my like niceties and then they respond to me.
Mhm.
That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
same. I think also like one thing I just sort of wanted to add is that, you know, we're mentioning all of these sort of bigger publications and I don't know, I personally just kind of went for it. Like if I have a story that I think is good and interesting and I feel like it should be in, you know, New York Times or whatever, I'm gonna pitch an editor at the New York Times, but maybe I'll also sort of look a few tiers down and see, you know, but I think again, like don't if you don't ask, you don't get. And so like by don't be afraid. Like at the end of the day, these editors are just people. And if you have a good story, they want that story. Doesn't matter that you know, that they're a big publication.
Totally. Yeah. And just on that, I would really just maximize your own position. Like, I feel like editors, they might be like older than you and like just maximize your, I mean, maybe I'm still like in youth, but like maximize your like position as like what you know as a like maybe a younger person in your world. I feel like you probably have so much knowledge and expertise that they don't have. And yeah, I completely agree with Talia. Like before I wrote for the New York Times, I didn't have that much like published clips, but just had access to like it was yeah, oh, I'd written I can't remember which taxidermy piece came first, but yeah, it was like about a queer taxidermy world that was just so specific. So I completely agree with you. Like aim aim high, just have like a niche entry and like access into a specific world or characters.
I think there's a recently, last week, there was an undergrad student who wrote about young people using fake IDs and how the fake IDs are becoming more and more hard to like know that they're fake. And they wrote it for the New York Times. So like they were really leaning into the fact that they were, I mean, I don't know if the writer in particular was using a fake ID, but like using the fact that they were very young and like what what the young people are doing.
Yeah.
Uh, so wait, I do want us to talk about, and there are a couple questions here about the financial side of things, like freelancing is also business. And sometimes you don't get paid on time, and then you may get a piece accepted, but it doesn't run for a long time, as you'd said. So we have questions here, like how do you financially sustain yourself while freelancing full time? And can you talk about securing health benefits and keeping a steady income as a freelancer? So can we talk about the business side of things? There may
Uh,
not be satisfying answers for this one.
yeah, I don't have a very satisfying answer. And I think I know Arielle doesn't either. Um, so for me, I'll just say like freelancing kind of became just like the obvious thing to do because, you know, there aren't many jobs out there either. And as a career changer, I sort of like, I felt going into an internship felt a bit, strange. And I sort of got that feedback from a few applications that I made, that I'm just a bit aged out of that category. And but then on the other hand, I didn't have the experience that, you look at these job applications and they're asking for like 4 or 5 years experience in this industry, and I just don't have that. So to me, building that experience, building that name has been about, that's what my freelancing has been for. And it's also why I'm like reaching for these bigger publications, so I can try and like jumpstart getting a job. I mean, the things I love freelancing, because you do get to write in these different styles for these different places and sort of be these different put these different hats on. But yeah, there's no health benefits. I mean, yeah, that doesn't exist. And for me personally, I used to be a dancer, and I've taught throughout my life, and so I'm sustaining myself financially still through teaching dance. I'm also married. My husband sort of helps. He's also a creative freelancer, so it's not like I can have his health insurance because he doesn't have it either. But there is that support, and I'm very lucky to sort of be in that position as a result. But I hate to be doom and gloom, but I don't think it's possible to support yourself, at least in the first year. Maybe things will turn around. I don't think it's possible to support yourself freelancing alone. Sorry.
Yeah, I absolutely have the same experience. I couldn't stay in New York because it was too expensive. Recently had to move back in with my parents in London because I cannot, like, I'm working the whole time, and like, yeah, again, not to be too like pessimistic, but like yeah, I feel like I'm, writing for big publications, but I'm like nowhere near being able to support myself financially. Or sorry, no, I am now just about, and I'm actually going to move somewhere next month, but like it's like you work so hard to like maybe be at like London living wage sort of thing. What I would recommend, and I'm starting to get on it, is like freelance copywriting stuff. I'm now having people coming to me through word of mouth for copywriting. And I've just started saying that I charge £500 a day, which in for American, like people paid more in America, so it might not sound that much, but like it's loads of money. And I find like the more you say, like people just think you're worth more if you like say, like people just pay it because they think like, oh, she must be really good. So like I could slave away for like a week on a Vogue article for £200, or one day of like more corporate copywriting as £500. So I'm not in that place yet, but I think I will if I continue this. I think you can get to a like sustainable place if you have another job, or if you want to do writing, like I guess like more corporate copywriting on the side. I don't think with journalism alone you can do it. Like, obviously, there's people in the world who do it, but like, I think it would be really challenging. And yeah, as we were talking about at the beginning of the call, like, I was sick last week, and then obviously in the UK, I have the NHS, but like, it's stressful not being able to, um, work and stuff. But yeah, I would look for copywriting stuff, whether it's like cold messaging people on, I find, find people. What someone recommended that I do is so say my beat is like health and relationship stuff. Find people on LinkedIn who work for like those types of companies, and find the email address of their like head of comms, reach out to them. And slowly like leads have been materializing.
And then let's talk about rates. I mean, a lot of places, a lot of the bigger publications may pay, some of them pay $1 word, but some of them pay less than you would expect. Do you just take the rate that they give you, or do you push back and ask for more? How do you handle that discussion? If they're like, yeah, we'd love that. Sometimes editors don't even tell you what the rate is. I've noticed sometimes, they should, but sometimes they don't. So how do you ask about the rate, and then how do you ask for more, or do you not ask for more?
I've never pushed back. I probably should. Do you, Talia?
I pushed back once, and it was, I mean, I think it was the right decision, because I knew I was going to end up doing considerably more work. Um, they did pay me more. Um, I struggle with this all the time. And I don't know what the right thing to do is sometimes, because frankly, some of my most time consuming and work intensive pieces have been the least well paid. Um, and so again, for me, I'm seeing this as building out a resume for myself, and just trying to get those clips. And so I have been accepting the rates. I do feel, I was just thinking about this last week actually, I do feel that I'm now finally at a place where I can be like, well, I've done this and this. Do you think, is there any wiggle room? And I might like put it like that, but I'm only maybe considering doing that now. I will say, I know Arielle, you had an experience early on where they paid you like what feels like an incredible amount of money. Although it's just not. Um, but a piece I just had that actually just came out today, I'll say very quickly, it was originally going to be with the cut. It ended up getting killed because the editor took too long to get it to it, and it was no longer timely. And they were going to pay me, I'm just going to be upfront about it, they were going to pay $450, I believe. I pitched it out. I waited till that time of year again. I spent a ton, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours pitching it out. Women's Health took it, and they're paying me $2,500 for it. So, and it's like basically I barely changed it. I did barely any extra work. So that's what you're dealing with. There's that spread, and that is the most I've ever been paid by like a lot.
Is it the story in print?
Sorry,
Is the story in print?
digital. They were going to
Oh,
put it in. Yeah, yeah.
wow. Wait, what's the length of it?
It ended up being around 1,500.
Wait,
Wow.
that's insane. I write for Women's Health Notes and they pay me 400 every
But
time.
but the thing is, like, so that's the point, right? So then, like, this is being touted as a big feature, but I'm sure if I was to write something different, they would give me a very different rate. And when I write for The Guardian, it's super low.
That's so true. I had that with Vice recently that like my editor or the editor I did a story with asked me like what I wanted to be paid and I was like, oh well like lived in America. I like $1 a word is my standard rate when like I'm quite lucky to get that. And then I didn't get that, but like I think I am getting more than like other people who I know who are writing for like UK Vice. But that's insane. The next time I write for Women's Health, I'm definitely gonna try and negotiate.
Do it, yeah.
It's insane.
Um, I mean, see, it's like it just shows you never know how much publications are going to pay. Um,
Yeah, it's why it's good to talk about as well. Because like
yeah.
I will just say, I wonder, because with that piece, I did say when I pitched it to her, one of the first things I said is like, just so you know, I'm pitching this out simultaneously. And I think there was FOMO. I wonder how much the fact that she wanted to make sure that they got it factored into how much she offered me. Now I'm not going to recommend doing that every time or anything, but like I've thought about that afterwards.
Mhm. I wonder, okay, I have, when I like keep talking about this part, let me get through some
Okay.
questions too. So someone's asking, will you have a piece written already before pitching it, or do you just send the idea?
Yes.
yeah.
Send the idea, right?
That piece was the only time because I'd already written it. I'd written it for the cut. So that's the only time I've ever had a draft pretty much done to send.
What's your strategy or philosophy coming up with topics for stories? What do you find most helpful in that? And were you picking topics based on what you thought you could publish?
I find Reddit is amazing. I didn't really get onto Reddit until like my degree. And I'm always just like stalking Reddit forums. Like I join like Reddit forums of topics I'm interested in, which like for me, pertain to health and relationships a lot. And look for interesting stories and message people. And so often people are up for talking about their most like intimate, like embarrassing, shameful experiences. And people are often very grateful because they want to talk about whatever issue they're experiencing. Um, I also just have a mindset, and maybe again because I write about a lot of like like life relationship stuff, but I am kind of like milking like any interaction I have in the world. Like I usually get ideas, and like so often I think get out the house, because sometimes you can be so like tunnel visioned with whatever deadline you have that you're so not inspired, and like you can like go see your grandparents, like go to like the shop and someone says something and you're like, oh, it's interesting that you're experiencing this, and it gives you an idea. So yeah, get out in the world and read it, I would say.
And I would say also like obviously to like an ethical degree, but mind the people that you know, right? Like so you can't maybe write about your sibling or whatever, but maybe they know something that's happening, or they know someone. Like I've had a bunch of story ideas because one of my closest friends is like a lead researcher in science at Yale. And so like I've gotten to know her friends who are all talking about all of these things about women in STEM and stuff like that. And like it starts me realizing, well, if they're talking about it, other people are talking about it, this is interesting. And just like really like it's incredible how the people that you know, even if they're not that interesting, they probably know people that are interesting. And it's just like you can broaden out story ideas that you wouldn't necessarily have from, like Arielle said, your own like bedroom.
Yeah, also on that, another thing I found helpful, like if there's something you're experiencing that you really want to write about, but you're not necessarily ready to like expose yourself as like a personal essay, you can find case studies like for that. Like I have a piece coming out for Mashable now, which is about like is about like obsessing over your partner's exes, which is like something I've experienced, but like it's like case study driven. So just yeah, it was really intimate and fun that you like aren't ready to like put, expose yourself too much. Find case studies.
That's a great idea. Um, how do you determine a deadline for a piece after getting a pitch commissioned? She says, I know it will vary depending on the word count and substance of the piece, but generally, what are some metrics you use to decide that, slash industry standards? I find that sometimes, like, like I'm someone who wants to please. So I would be like, oh, I'll get it done really quick. Like, or I'd hear other students or, writers say that. And I'm like, wait, do you think you can actually get it done by then? So how do you handle that?
I literally always do that. It's like I'm such a nerd. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I can do it in like 3 days because I want to like impress them. But I think sometimes you like you do want to impress them because if it's a new editor, you want to show you're capable. But then
Yeah.
right now I'm so overwhelmed because I've so many deadlines like now because I've done that. So ta yeah, Talia, what do you do?
Yeah, same. I definitely have a people pleasing problem with that.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah, I think also like what I try and tell myself anyway is that another way to impress people is to say like, oh yeah, I'll have it done in 10 days, but actually have it done in 5 or 3. And like get it in sooner and they can see that you can be like, so I don't know, that's just like what I tell myself. But I'm still learning this, and I think one thing that I can tell myself and tell anyone else I don't know is that however long you think it's going to take longer. And just to be realistic for that. There is no point in being impressive and being like, I can have it done tomorrow, and then having to be like, hey, actually, sorry, I need 3 more days. Um, that being said, I do think there's a lot of people to blame. You can be like, oh my goodness, I just had this other source. And like more often than like, I'm not saying lie, do not lie, but like, so my source actually, would love to talk to them again. Do you mind actually pushing it out to Friday? And if they say, oh no, sorry, we'd really like to have it on the original day, that's fine. You need to be prepared for that. But I think there are ways to like give yourself a little bit more time. But just don't get yourself in that position because it's so stressful. It's the worst.
Yeah.
We have a follow-up on something you said, Arielle, like getting sources to talk about intimate details. Do you, and I know this, it doesn't have to just be about like intimate stories, but do you always try to get people on the record? Are you ever letting people be anonymous in your stories or with a pseudonym? And where do you pitch if you're using pseudonyms?
A lot of publications don't mind at all if it's pseudonyms like Women's Health. I mean, it probably depends on the stories, but the like health, sex, relationship stuff I've done, Women's Health, Cosmo, Dazed, kind of like the majority of publications. Like I imagine more newsy ones like the New York Times, maybe the Guardian. And obviously if there's a story that you have like allegations in, that's different. But yeah, I find like a lot of the sex and relationship pieces I've done are like all anonymous sources and the publications haven't minded. Um, and then
Are
sometimes
are
people,
you saying that in the pitch? These people are anonymous, or do you let
yeah,
them?
I say like not their real name.
Mhm.
And it's been fine. Yeah, I think if it was like for the New York Times or the God, yeah, if it's a more like newsy place, I think it would be a problem. But sometimes people want to be on the record. Sometimes people are talking about something that you think because of their privacy or safety, or because it's about something sexual that they like won't want their name in it, and sometimes people don't mind. But yeah, obviously, respect that and have that conversation with them.
Yeah, I recently have a good amount of experience, as Whitney knows, with having to write about people anonymously. And I think that at least have like one or two voices in the piece where you have a real name, just to ground it for the reader. So if you know you have like an excellent source that must be anonymous for their safety, um, that's fine. But find someone else who will go on the record. And I'll just give some tips that I learned recently. Um, Obviously this is going to depend on the topic like greatly, but finding people who are already retired so they're not worried about retribution against their job or anything like that. Um, or finding people who are in a different country so they may not be subject to the same laws and issues. Just again, just to have that name in there.
Um, this student is asking if a story is big enough, you might be able to split the story and write one for Vice in Vice style and another word for the cut. And I do get this question a lot, like how do you know, like how do you pitch sort of the same thing to different places? And I usually advise you don't want to sort of cannibalize one story for another, and just like that can be, it's hard. Like where does a beat, what is part of a beat and what is part of like the same idea? So I guess how do you think about that?
I don't think I'd want to do two at once. Thank you for whoever said that. That's a great idea. And I actually have been thinking about that because the piece in the cart is hopefully coming out soon, unless there's any issues with the editor. She did, yeah, reply to me in the end, Talia. We were chatting about this. But I think there's a possibility of doing a photo story for Vice. Like I also, as I was saying, like take photos as well, which means you can kind of offer something in a slightly different medium from a different perspective. The community sauna piece I did for Vogue, I'm now, that was out like a month ago. I'm doing something for Time Out on like sauna nightlife in the UK. So I think as long as you have a different focus, and I would wait till the dust has settled a bit and you're not just trying to like, you know, desperately pull something into two stories, like actually be sure that like there is something separate here. Because I think I can imagine getting myself into quite a stressful situation if you try and split one story into two and you're working on it at the same time. But I don't know, maybe you have a different experience, yeah.
Well, actually, I had a situation that happened recently that I was pleasantly surprised. I had pitched a profile to Women's Health and New York Times and a few other places, but I specifically made those pitches quite different. And the focus would be quite different. At New York Times, it's going to the dance section, so I'm very like focused on the choreography piece, whereas for Women's Health, I made it much more like profile-y.
Mhm.
And Women's Health was like, I sort of touched on this earlier, but they were a little bit like umming and ahhing about it. And they ultimately want it maybe to be a cover feature for Pride Month. Um, which would be a very different thing. And then after months, like literally, like almost 2 months, I heard back from New York Times and they want to take it. So I wrote back to Women's Health, my editor there, and I was like, listen, I'm so sorry. I know you were on the fence about this. I really appreciate that you were trying to push this through with the executive editor, but it was accepted in this form. And I told her that it was going to be focused on choreography, and which it will be. And she was like, oh, that's fine. I think we can still like as long, we'll keep trying to make this happen. Now, I don't know if it is going to happen. We'll see. Well, it's a long time until June. Um, but um, but yeah, so I was pleasantly surprised. I thought I was telling her like I'm taking this away from you because I'm going to be writing one version of it. And she was like, no, that's fine. So again, I don't know if there's a real rubric there.
And would you go back to the editor at the Times to tell them?
Well, I haven't thought about it. I mean, I think that basically I'm going to be writing this and it's going to come out March 19th. And then the next piece wouldn't come out till June. So I don't personally think that I
Yeah.
should, but maybe I should. I don't know. You tell me.
No, no. No, I think that works. I mean, it's like constantly communicating and like, what do you say to people? And that's like a lot of the questions I get from writers. Okay, these are sort of similar questions, but how do you curate your public persona that editors can see and interact with, like on Twitter and Instagram, Substack, and what do you think is most important? And then sort of similarly, do you maintain a portfolio of your work, and does that come in handy when pitching? So it's sort of like, how do you present yourself in that way, and like in an outward way?
Yeah, I now post on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. I'll like post my articles. I like find it too cringe to like. I mean, that's probably doing myself a disservice. I don't actually just like do like tweets about like my thoughts. Like I'm just too self-conscious and scared of putting like opinions into the world. But I share all my articles, and I've actually had work come from that. Like I've had copywriting work people reach out to me saying like, I like the stuff you do. Do you want to do copywriting me? And then I pitch stuff to like GQ or like Women's Health, and then introduce myself, and they're like, oh yeah, like I know your work, and it's because we like follow each other on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and they get a feel for who I am. So I definitely would recommend it, even if it feels like embarrassing and like exposing to share your work. I think it's so important. I also didn't have a website until like last year, and I think that's been so helpful. I think it just makes you seem more like professional. So yeah, I think it is super important. And I personally like my Instagram's also like my personal Instagram. So there'll be like me and my friends hanging out. And sometimes I think about should I make it more professional, but then I kind of feel like we're living in an age where like a personal brand is like more, but like thinking about like Gia Tolentino, like a New Yorker writer I love, like she's, always posting her kids and like life on her Instagram. So I think depending on what you write about is kind of fine, but maybe when I'm more of an adult, I'll change my mind.
Yeah, I'm also fairly uncomfortable with posting a lot. I did sort of engage a little bit more when Threads opened up. I stopped posting to X. I do still have an account there, but I haven't checked it. I'm not on it at all. And I think, frankly, with like all of the upheaval with all the different social medias right now, I'm actually posting more to LinkedIn. And my Instagram is my very, very locked down private Instagram. So I don't have that. But I am posting everything and I am engaging on Blue Sky and Threads. Um, like Arielle said before, like just liking certain editors' posts and like so that your name pops up in their mind, I think that that's valuable. I know that some people go the like creating a personal brand on social media route, and I really, really applaud that. I just don't have the energy.
And I'll ask this one other question, and then I have sort of a wrap-up question. Is there a specific, this is a question I get a lot from different people. Is there a specific day of the week or time of the day that you prioritize sending pitches?
No. No,
It's so hard. I mean, because I'll get responses at the weirdest of times from people where I'm like, what time zone are you in? Um, and then you'll try and pitch something out and I know that one editor like specifically waits till Friday afternoon to like check all those things because they've gotten all their work done throughout the week. And then there's other people that are like, nope, I'm done. So I don't think there's any rhyme or reason to it. I think probably morning is better. You're gonna catch people more likely. Um, but like I said, like I've had responses or things opened at like, at lunchtime and stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when I was working as an editor, there wasn't a specific day. Or like sometimes if there is a section that runs, like I think the style section in the Times runs on Thursdays or something. So maybe Friday would be a good time because that's when they're trying to get things going again. But yeah, I think Sylvan is saying she read that Tuesdays at 11 is the best time to email people. So um I think it all just depends. But and then my question I wanted to sort of leave us with is, what do you wish you knew when you were in school that you know now? I know you feel like it hasn't been that long since you were here, but is there anything that you were like, man, I wish I would have known that or would have done that?
I think kind of what I said before about just really like exploiting and maximizing your, what your interests are like on the ground, like whether it's like I don't know, go to like a chess club in New York and there's like a chess scene, like just really being able to offer what you are obsessed with. And I think also like write stuff that you want to read and you're excited by, because I think I've definitely like I used to do like music writing that I like never read like music criticism, and I think now I write stuff that I'm like I would so click on this. I think if you're writing stuff that isn't your type of thing, like it's just not going to be like that good. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's my advice.
Yeah, and I think what I said earlier, where I just didn't realize that editors actually want your work, was a major one that I've come to learn. And then I think the other thing, and this is like for anyone who's watching that like me hadn't written that much before, or had much published, I should say. Um, I think getting a piece back from an editor that is like completely in red is so jarring. And it's not just that it's like your ego is bruised. It's like, oh, am I bad at this? That was how I took it at the beginning. And I've now experienced, and I've spoken to enough other experienced writers to know that like, no, that's actually normal. Like it should all come back in red. Maybe not all, but it's and to not take that on personally, but sort of see it as like, oh, they're actually trying to help me. Because at the end of the day, your name is on that piece. It's your byline. And if they help you make it awesome, then that's better for you and your career and for the next piece that you try and pitch and be like, look, I had this great piece in such and such publication. So I wish I'd known that it wasn't like an indictment on my ability at first, because I really took it quite hard.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to some writers who are like, oh, they're a great editor. They barely edited my piece, and I'm like, like to me, from the editing standpoint, like a piece that is edited a lot means that they're engaging with your piece a lot, right? And so that is a good thing, but it is hard because you're like, are those those red marks on my soul? But like, it's not. It's just the way it goes. Um, Thank you both so much for your time. Thank you for answering questions. Um, and I'm excited to see all that you're doing, and we should keep an eye out for all of these different things you're writing. What is the piece that came out today, Talia?
Um, so it's in women's health, and it's about, well, I had originally written it with more of a climate change bent, but that kind of got reduced a little bit, and it's on wild ice skating and how ice, you remember the piece that was from ages
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So that finally came out today in Women's Health, and it's beautiful. The art team did an incredible job. So, if enough not for my writing, go check it out for how beautiful they made it with all that artwork.
And Arielle, you have a piece coming out Friday, you think?
For the
Guardian?
Guardian, I'm just about to have a call with my editor straight after this. It was meant to be Thursday, but I kind of think it won't be. I'm hoping it won't be because I need to like mentally prepare myself. But yeah, soon. Yeah, yeah, a big piece in the Guardian soon.
All right, well, we'll look out for him. Thank you both so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.